Welcome to Steel, Forge, and Fire, Sword and Knife. On this channel, we support our U.S. veterans. Veterans, there's a place for you here. There's a number in the description of all my videos if you are in despair. Did you ever have a point where you questioned why you're into a certain thing? You ever think back, like, where did it all start? Where did it all come from? Why are you into one thing and not into another thing? It's just, what makes us all unique, or what makes us all a group or have things in common. There's so many times when I'm sociable with people, or, I'm in a social environment, or I'm speaking to friends or acquaintances of friends or friends of friends or something like that. And, you get into the BSing thing mode, and you start talking about what you do and what your job is, and start talking about life, and then you start talking about your interests and maybe your hobbies and things that you're into and all that. If it would come up to basically a hobby or something I'm into, I'm doing YouTube. That's something I enjoy doing, as far as a content creator and all that stuff. Oh, what do you do on YouTube? Well, I'm really into blades. And people will be like, you're into blades? Oh, okay. That sounds interesting. What kind of blades? Like kitchen knife blades or chef knives or things like that? I says, no, really, honestly, I love all blades. Yeah, kitchen knives and all that, but I love all blades. Knives, everyday carries and things like that, foldables, big bowies. Normally when the conversation goes into knives, people can kind of relate to it because, knives are just kind of part of our everyday. I mean, we use knives every day. We use knives when we eat. We use knives when we do food prep. There's not a day that goes by in our lives as adults that we don't use a knife for some way, shape, or form. Even just to spread some peanut butter on your sandwich. You're always using some kind of a knife or some kind of steel with a handle on it. We can relate to knives pretty well. And then I would go on and I would say, well, my real passion is into swords. And then most people just kind of just step back, and be like, swords, really? Okay. Some people will kind of change the topic or move on to something else. Or some people inquire and be like, so why are you into swords? What do you do with them? Do you collect them, or why do you like swords? And then it all ends up being a big laugh because I explain it to them and this, that, and the other thing. But, besides that, there's so many occurrences that I encounter these situations with people that really don't understand why I love swords. And I think to myself, so why do you like swords? Where did this all come from? Why do I have such a passion for swords? Why do I love swordcraft so much? A couple of things went in my head, and it's hard to really answer. It's not an easy question for me to answer because it's not just one thing. It's not a simple answer. It's kind of a multitude of things that kind of combine to one overall theme of why I'm into swords. I figured I wanted to make this podcast up so I can kind of just get that out there and see if maybe people can join in the conversation, or maybe have something to think about. Why are you into films, or are you into movies, which I am? Why are you into the arts, the art of film and all that, which I'm heavy into, being in the business that I'm in, the production aspect and everything that goes on behind the camera. Why are you into certain things that you're into? Did you ever stop and think back and say, but why? Maybe the absurd things that you're into, why are you into them? I did a lot of thinking regarding why I'm into sword. Like I said, it's a complex answer. When I hold a sword or I think of a sword, it brings me back to a different time in our civilization. Today, we talk about EDCs. Yes, EDCs in terms of everyday carries, okay? We talk about, our EDC knives, but really the EDCs, our real EDCs every day is one of these things, a cell phone, okay? This is our EDC. We don't leave the house without our cell phones. We may leave the house without our knives, but our cell phone is always at our side. I can guarantee that. Think about what the EDC was every day for ancient people, before technology, before all of the modern advances that we are in today, in ancient Greece or ancient Japan or ancient Europe, okay, or even the States, all the ancient people, ancient civilizations and tribes that lived hundreds and hundreds of years ago in the 7th century, in the 14th century. There's so many different types of civilizations, some great warriors and great civilizations back in the day. Their EDC every day was a sword, okay? A sword, the importance of the sword, okay, to ancient man, ancient women, even ancient child, was a
It's something that they just naturally had at their hip or on their back. It's something they carried every day for means of survival. Now think about that, means of survival. We buy swords today for enjoyment, to relish in the artistic element of it. But they had it for a means of survival, okay? It was a necessity to carry a weapon, an axe, a sword, a knife, a big knife, a spear, bow and arrows, okay? The ancient weaponry of the past. This was a necessity for them. But I also think about a time when life was simple. Live off the land. I felt like the air was fresh. I'm sure it was. The air was fresh. The air was clean. It wasn't polluted. We actually had something called an ozone layer, in ancient times. It was just a natural world. It was a different time, and it just takes me back to that time when the world was so much simpler, where people had to learn how to live off the land, when people had to kind of invent things along the way. And I have such admiration for people in the past, even more than today, because they had to kind of invent the wheel, literally invent the wheel on their own. Now you talk about like the smiths of today and the people who make swords of today. Yes, there's some really amazing sword makers out there, even in Japan still to this day. These people, as talented as they are and as good as the work that they do, they're riding off the backs of generations of people before them. They were taught this trade. They were given the tools. They were given this experience. They were given the knowledge. For Christ's sake, you can go on YouTube and you can learn how to make a sword. The information is limitless. It's boundless as far as wanting to get the info you need to do a certain thing today. The information is there for you. It's there to teach you. Ancient man, there was no one before them other than maybe their father or their grandfather before them within their own family tribes, okay? But there was no information, there was no internet. They had to invent things as they went along. And they screwed up a lot, they learned from their mistakes, and they got it right. So it's you have to admire the perseverance of ancient man to basically, pass along these traits, which we, in a lot of civilizations, they still use today, especially in ancient Japan. I just admire the time of man where we relied on simple weapons. They were simpler times. Everything was just fresh and green and blue, and it was just a much more wholesome, cleaner world. And I don't know, it's hard for me to describe, but that's the feeling that I get when I see a sword or I hold a sword. It's just an inner feeling, an inner fuzzy feeling that I get from that time. Of course, listen, they were brutal times. You probably wouldn't live past 20, 25 years old. But think about the adventure and the excitement you had up until that 20, 25 years of life, okay? Children had swords in their hand before they were 10. They were master swordsmen by the time they were 15. Okay, carrying swords around, carrying knives around, learning how to defend themselves, learning how to fight, learning how to defend their family. Men were men when they were boys. Women were women, okay? Basically from birth. It was a different time and a different discipline of people back then in the time of the sword. So I just think back at those times. When I see a sword, I respect the history. That's the important part, guys, the history. The history, the time when swords were a means of survival, the times when swords were a means of prestige, the times when swords were worn, okay, with honor and with pride, okay? It was a different time back then, and that's what I look at, and that's what I look back at, is the history of our weapons. Because for centuries and centuries and centuries, thousands of years, that's all man knew. To make steel, to make things sharp, and to be able to defend themselves with them, okay? King Arthur, okay, if there was a King Arthur, but they were the knights, the chivalry of the knights, and the code of conduct, the code of the knight that they lived by. These were exciting times, guys. These were adventurous times, dangerous times. Would I want to dial myself back in and live in that world? I would love to visit it. I would love to visit different times. If I had a time machine, I would visit every time period of the most incredible warriors that I've ever seen. You know, I go back to the time of 550 BC. There was a group called the Immortals. They were a group of 10,000 heavily armed infantry. You know, they fought with a variety of weapons. I mean, each soldier carried a spear, a sword, arrows, a bow, and a shield, all the essentials of life. The sight of the Immortals approaching would cause cities to surrender. I mean, that's so badass. You know, the knights, AD 15th century, okay? Knights were a troop in the medieval era, okay? They were heavily armed warriors, rode on horseback. Knights followed a code of chivalry, of conduct, and were expected to exhibit like a gentleman's behavior. Knights used swords or lances as their primary weapon of choice in battle. It always goes back to the sword, guys. The Spartans, okay, the Spartans, 6th century to 4th century BC. We all know the stories about the Spartans, guys. Sparta was a prominent warrior city-state in ancient Greece. Only the strongest were considered to be worthy of Sparta. The word Spartan becomes synonymous with fearlessness and military power. Spartans were badass, guys. The Mongolian warriors, okay, of Genghis Khan, okay, they stretched through all of Asia and part of Europe. These were all fierce warriors that lived by the way of the sword and the spear. Okay, but my favorite warriors of all time and my favorite type of sword of all time is definitely the katana. And we're talking about the samurai, guys. 12th century to about 1867 AD, actually not that long ago. You know, samurai warriors were from the land of the rising sun. The samurai warriors were also referred to as bushi, which means warrior. The traditional samurai code of honor, discipline, and mortality are also known as bushido, meaning the way of the warrior was followed by each samurai. The samurai warriors were on top of the social caste system in Japan. Guys, samurai warriors, from the moment of birth up until the moment of death, they just lived by a code of extreme discipline. There is nothing, no move that they made, no decision that they made that wasn't governed by an extreme level of discipline. You know, you should definitely read like the book of Bushido and really understand the training and the schooling of Bushido and the type of discipline and code of discipline they live by. I mean, I respect the hell out of it. It must have been really difficult to live, but you have to respect the amount of discipline that these people had. Now, the most amazing thing about these people is their entire existence was surrounded by their weapons, by their swords. Samurais, their swords, their soul, it was said to have their souls were embedded into the blades of their swords. Their swords were always at their sides. And even in their sleep, they had it basically at their sides, on their bedside, ready at all times. Their swords never left their sides. They had so much respect and honor for their swords that it was basically a way of life for them from an early age up until death. Ultimate respect for their swords. And I think that's probably where I got all of the respect and honor for katana, from the teachings of Bushido and the ways of the samurai and the ways of ancient Japan. For those of you who are fortunate enough to have a katana in your possession, and you know, today you can get, you know, katana for $50, $80, $100. I mean, there's so many different ways that you can get a katana in your hands. Whatever the katana may be, I mean, when you have one of these in your hands, guys, you have to respect the tradition that went into forging and making this katana, and what it represents and what it stands for is just an incredible history. I respect the katana. When I hold a katana in my hand, I have ultimate respect for it, because I know the history that went behind making this weapon and the importance of this weapon to a whole tribe of people. And even today, it's just an amazing history. It's hard for me to put it in words, you know, within the context of this podcast, but I think you can understand what I'm saying. It's just it's such an important item in the lives of samurai back in the day. And I respect that, and I respect their honor and their code and what they live by. You know, they really did believe that their souls were actually embedded into the blades. When samurai died, if they were retrievable, their armor and their swords were passed on to their family members, and they honored them as relics of that samurai, of these people. It's just such an amazing history, and it's such an amazing weapon. Even today, how it's formed and how it's constructed. I mean, It's such an amazingly important part of history in Japan that even today, in a small village in Shimane in southwest Japan, they still make a metal ore. They still make metal ore for samurai swords in the same way it has been done basically for centuries in earthen smelting furnaces called, why I named my channel that, because steel is a made element. Think about these people without having any education, anyone to pass anything on to them. The first civilizations that started making steel weapons, and think about how they had to invent the wheel themselves. They had to figure out, how to, the heat tempering and the forges and the heat and the smelting and the folding, just how they had to figure all this stuff out on their own. I'm sure they messed up a lot, but they damn well got it right, because they passed on that stuff from generations to generations for thousands of years. And you have to respect that. I respect the Smiths. I dazzle in even seeing on YouTube. I have so much respect and admiration for how the technology that man had produced to basically make these weapons out of forges with simple tools and rocks banging together to make flame. None of the advances today, and how they figured all this out. And that is just, I love that. I don't know. I don't really have many words to really describe it. I'm amazed by it, and I am so enthusiastic to always learn more about how ancient man did what they did. That's it, guys. It's just the history of the weapon, the beauty of the weapon, the respect I have for the making of steel, the amazement I have for the making of steel. And that's just basically why I love all blades, and especially swords, and especially, the ancient katana, that we are so lucky to be able to have a representation, a duplicate of it today, in so many different ways, shapes, or forms. And that's why I emphasize for people to get budget swords, to get them into katana. But if you ever have the means of getting a quality katana in your hand, you really appreciate the work that is put into these weapons, and they're beautiful. They really are. That's the best way I could describe it to you guys. That's why I like swords. Share in the conversation. Let us know why you like swords. You may just like it just to be able to cut with them and have a good time with them. But is there any other inner meaning of why you love swords? Do you share that sentiment with me? Or am I alone in this? I don't think I am. I think some people watching out there that might share the same sentiment and respect for the honored trade of making weapons and making steel and forging steel, and the beauty of these weapons. Okay, the European swords, the knight sword, okay, the kukri from the Gurkhas. The list can go on and on and on. And the reason why it's such a popular thing today is because it is a part of our history. It was a large part of our history of man back in the day with these weapons. I have admiration for it, guys. And well, that's it, guys. That's why basically I love swords. That's why I love swords, and I basically can't get enough of them. So that's all I got for you guys. Until my next podcast video, have a good one, guys. Thanks for joining me. Joe from Steel Forge and Fire Sword and Knife. If you want to see more swords, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and I'll show you what I got. Let's have a chat. Let's have fun talking about our ancient swords of today. Have a good one, guys. Ciao.